Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Technocratic podcast. Today, our guest is Matt Zacks, a CTO from the EdTech and FinTech space. Matt has been leading engineering teams for more than 20 plus years. I first met Matt when I was doing a rollup, and we had to purchase Matt's company. Matt came to work for me as a VP of engineering. What I noticed immediately about him was his ability to connect with others on his team. He just had a knack for building good engineering teams, and he's an overall very thoughtful and smart guy when it comes to leading technology. I've been looking forward to having Matt on the show for a while, so super glad that he's been able to join today. Welcome to the podcast, Matt. It's great to have you.
Thank you, Bobby. It's great to be here. Good to see you again, by the way. We haven't seen each other in a while.
It's been a while. And we're going to talk all about your awesome journey. Usually at this point, we turn it over to my trusty sidekick, Mishka, but unfortunately he couldn't join us today. So I'll actually help to get us warmed up and have some get to know you questions. And I'm going to try to channel Mishka when I do this, but one of his favorite questions is, what's your favorite holiday? So we're coming up on, we're like 10 days from Christmas or something. What's your favorite holiday of the year and why?
Oh, man. By far is Thanksgiving. Because so I start the day off with a turkey trot. We do a 5K run.
Oh, wow.
So that's one of the things. Running has been one of the things. It's a real good stress reliever for me. Obviously the CTO roles and VP of engineering for these organizations are stressful at times. There's a lot to deliver and there's a lot to keep track of. So it's really just always been good for me to get out there, outside and run and get some fresh air, blow off some steam. So I do the 5K run, and then I'm the chef. So I have to
oh, you're a chef, you said. Okay.
Yeah, so I have to get back home as quickly as possible, get the turkey in the oven, get the stuffing started. So
God.
It starts out to be a very, very busy day for me.
Absolutely. That is awesome.
Then football. So I'm from Detroit, from Flint, Michigan originally. So Detroit Lions now are awesome for the first time in my life.
First time.
That's right. Usually my Thanksgivings are ruined by the Lions. Now it's something that's fun.
Now it's a fun thing. Exactly, dude.
That's and then amazing. Usually the turkey comes out around 2:00, 3:00 during halftime. We eat and watch football and take naps. So like for me, that day covers all the bases. I love it.
Yeah. Family, sports, cooking, all of it. Now, Matt, didn't you do like some kind of, weren't you into poker and you did some kind of like poker newsletter back in the day?
So this was, so I had a little publishing company. It was between my time in New York City. I spent about 6.5 years after college living in New York, and that's where I cut my teeth as a developer and technologist.
Okay.
And then, through my experiences there and building a team in India, I spent about 6 months in Bangalore during that time. And it was really a life-changing experience. I absolutely love every time I've been to India, whether it's to visit team members, build a new team, just check in and see how things are going from an operational perspective with some of the groups that I've been leading in my organizations. It was just kind of a life-changing experience for me. I really came from humble beginnings, and it was probably the first time in my life where I really felt like, I feel like I'm on the right track. I feel like, I can bring a lot to this world and to the organizations that I work for. And I really had a strong belief that I wanted to go back to Flint, Michigan to do something good, do some technology for good back in my hometown. And so I started out I built a couple of websites for foundations there. Okay. And then actually built kind of a homegrown CMS where you could use database entries to build your website content, to edit your website content.
This is like pre all the modern CMSs.
This is back pre in the day. All that stuff. This was back in probably around 2001, 2002 when I was doing that. And it was all really just CGI driven databases and HTML and using some of those really old technologies. Yeah. And but I did all the elements that you would want in a CMS. You could have these forms that you fill out, and it populates images and text on your website. You could input HTML to have an input or change design. And then I can train people at the organizations how to use it. They didn't need to know a whole lot about technology. Similar to the CMSs today, you don't really need to know HTML to be able to change your website. And I was doing that back in 2000 for foundations, and then decided to publish a couple of a newspaper and then a magazine later on. And the poker magazine was actually not my idea. I was more kind of running a publishing company and taking on investment and people that had ideas for publications that they wanted to put out. And someone came to me with the idea, and I ended up developing it and producing. But I really don't know a lot about poker. Like if I go to, if I go to
you're not Las playing Vegas in Vegas.
No.
Okay. I just remembered from years ago you mentioned something about that, and it's stuck in my mind.
Yeah.
Matt, I think we can just get right into it. One of the things that I think our audience would really benefit from is like, there's a lot of people who listen to Technocratic who are directors and VPs and CTO types that sometimes struggle with the people part of the job, making the right kind of connection with their people, with their peers, with people above them. Do you have any thoughts to share on, like, if you just think about, for example, you have like a new team and maybe you did a reorganization or something, and now you have these new teams. How do you start to get them to gel? How do you create that chemistry inside an engineering team or even a product engineering combo team? Like, what are some of the things you found in your career really work for you?
Yeah, I think there's a few things. For me, I think everybody probably approaches this differently, but for me, I like to get directly in front of people. So, if you remember TADS, back in the day, they're located in Minneapolis, great office out there. I wanted to spend a lot of time in front of people, in front of the managers there to kind of build that rapport. I would say early in my career, I had the benefit of working with organizational consultant in residence, and they did a lot of, management training, organizational management training. One of the things that was really effective was this feedback model called the Johari window. It's actually a cognitive psychological feedback model. And essentially the goal is to just bring out into the open, out into the public, more information about yourself and more understanding for the people that are around you. So, a good example, a good example of it is the people listening to this podcast don't know me at all. So if I say, well, I like to learn something new every year, and the thing that I want to learn this year is how to surf. The more that you get to know about me, the more comfortable you get, and the more you're willing to be able to have tough conversations. Almost like, you can think of it like a friend. Like the closer that you are with someone, the more likely it is that you can accept feedback, and you can start to talk about what's in their blind spot and the things that they're not seeing that you're seeing, and vice versa. They can start talking about the things that I'm not seeing in my blind spot. And to me, the whole foundation of being a good manager is building those good relationships, so that when the going gets tough, and I can assure you in technology, there's always going to be a time when you're going to have a tough conversation, right? You're going to have a release that didn't go well, or maybe you missed the mark a little bit on a feature, or something's taking longer than it should have taken. And I think those sorts of things get easier to have those conversations and to get on the same page and get alignment when you have close relationships.
Is that, Matt, the same thing? It was what you're saying, the same thing as saying be more vulnerable? Is it about vulnerability and showing more vulnerability to you?
I think it's, this essentially what this model talks about is, it's essentially an intersection between, what others know about you and what you know about yourself. And, out of that intersection is 4 quadrants. What nobody knows about you and what you don't know about yourself is one quadrant. So that's something that's completely in the dark, right? You need a psychotherapist to sit on the couch and tell you what that is. So that's not really the subject of what you would deal with at work. And then there's the stuff that you know about yourself and others don't know about you. And that's just the conversation of, here's what you should know about my family. Here's what you should know about what I think about, how to build technology in an organization. And then vice versa, they have stuff that they know about themselves that you don't know. And then again, that's just sharing and bringing more out to widen really that window of what's public knowledge. Yeah. The things that you see that they don't see are the most important, because then you can really start to make improvement. I had a manager that, I had the saying that let's get back to the last known good, right? Right. There was a release. Some things didn't go perfectly well. The first thing that you do is, to triage a problem is go back to the last known good state that product was in or that function was in. Sure. Well, he wasn't honest about what that was. Right. So, to me, that's just the biggest mistake, the biggest impediment to really forming a high functioning team is the lack of transparency. Okay. And so with him knowing that about me and with us being able to have that conversation, I could just be really clear with him. That's really interesting. That sort of thing could never happen again.
Right. You said this is great. The biggest impediment to forming a high performance team is transparency. That is really powerful. That is really good. You see all these, I wonder what you think about this. You see all these like top tier VPs and CTO types and chief product officers that are quite impersonal, and yet they're able to drive pretty good success. You see them everywhere in places in Silicon Valley, in I would say more VC-backed companies and companies that are like strong B2B SaaS, super tech-oriented companies. They just the transparency might be there in some ways, but they're not going on some vulnerability tour or something to create that. And yet they still get a lot of performance out of their teams. What about that aspect of it? Because I believe what you're saying, but then there's this evidence that there's other ways that it could work too.
Yeah. So I think, the classic 3 things that you need to worry about to me to build well-performing teams are, the technology itself, the technology and tools that you're using to function, whether it's, vulnerability management, whether it's, some component of your SDLC process, all those things are pretty important. And those are areas for improvement that you might want to standardize across an organization, especially if you're looking at an organization as complex as the one that I work for. 40, 50 different products, all with different tool sets and different technologies potentially. Yeah. Standardizing as much as you can of that is really important to finding efficiency and getting kind of an economy of scale. Yeah. The second most important, or what's second of the 3 things to be concerned about is your people. And, and so for me, the structure is number 1.
Like the team structure?
The org structure. Mm-hmm. I look at the org structure as similar as schema, and that, if you don't get the schema right initially,
nothing else matters kind of thing.
You're going to be fighting against that every day until you fix it, right?
That's interesting. Org structure, database schema. I've never heard that connection, but that's kind of interesting.
Think about it exactly in the same way. Yeah. So, and so I feel like if you don't have the structure right, if people don't have the right spans of control across the organization to have the right impact on the organization, you're going to be fighting against that until you fix it. So that's, the second thing. Also that goes along with that is, what I like to think of as job architecture. Are people you might have a team in India, UK, different places in the United States, Australia, some contracting teams in South America. That's not too dissimilar for what I was working with. Is a senior developer in Australia the same as level as a senior developer in the UK? So getting an understanding of what the jobs are, what the growth paths are, all of that again is on the people side that need to be addressed so that you have high retention, so that you can grow that organization in an effective way, so that raises and promotions are meaningful and consistent across the organization. So that's in the people side. And the third most important is obviously the process. So how are we going about getting things done? And again, standardizing process and using process that's effective in the context of that organization is the third component that need to work well. So the thing that I focused on initially, which was interpersonal relationships, to help inspire and get maybe more transparency and more production out of your management group, to get them an understanding for how to drive change quickly and get alignment quickly. That's one small portion of the people side, which is again just one portion of
sure. There's a lot that goes into it. It seems like there's generally speaking kind of more of a trend. I'll see if you agree with this, to starting to measure engineering more and more like that in more companies that sort of like espouse that philosophy of metrics and KPIs. They seem to do better. I mean, they have to use it right. They have to use it correctly, the KPI framework or the metrics framework. But
absolutely,
it seems to be catching more and more fire around like just measuring your engineering team. Whereas like 10 years ago, not as much. Like, so like, obviously there's Dora, but then all these VPs and CTOs, they seem to start doing their own metrics. What do you think the role of metrics is in managing an engineering team for a CTO? Let's say it's 100-person, 200-person company.
I think it's critically important, actually. So I do think Dora metrics are a good standard to determine and to promote high performing teams. That's definitely something that should be put into practice. But there's also, depending on the organization, depending on the kinds of change that you're trying to institute within that organization, there are other KPI that you need to look at that are better measures of progress along those lines. Like one example might be vulnerability management, right? Like some sort of mechanism to score your vulnerability issues when it comes to each product or each technical stack. I think that's super important right now.
Yeah, that's a good one.
And
do you care about stuff like velocity? Do you like to measure velocity?
I do, but it's
or is that a silly
tricky
metric in your mind?
Well, so velocity, I think you can get in trouble with because my feeling has always been putting any pressure on an unstable metric makes that metric unreliable. So if you start to say, look, every single team needs to do 100 story points per sprint, and they need to do better than that, let's say. Well, it's pretty easy to game the system for that team to start to change how they do estimation, to sort of start to alter how
just
they
label everything 100 point and you're done with one story.
They're going to trust me. If you say that the most important thing for this team to do in the next, sprint over sprint is to reach 100 points, they're going to find a way to do it, whether it's real or not.
Yeah.
But by the same token, I want to have some understanding for what the velocity is on that team and what impact will more developers, more QA, more more product capacity have on the amount of work that team's doing.
Yeah, sure.
And so, like, I'm a big proponent of SAFe. I really think when it comes to managing a large and complex portfolio. That's one of the most effective.
SAFe is a very popular framework. That's right. Was it hard for you guys how long did it take to roll out SAFe?
So I think it took roughly 6 months or so for each division. For each division. Yeah, to roll it out.
Right. And did you find that did it create clarity for you as a CTO or a VP of engineering? Did it create more structure where there was none?
It did. And again, a good, important KPI, in my opinion, comes out of that, which is objective completion percentages. So, within the SAFe framework, you're kind of forced into this quarterly planning process.
Yeah.
At which time you're committing to some pretty big objectives for each quarter for each team. Mm-hmm. And those objectives need to align to business goals, as well as some of the things that you need to tackle from a technology standpoint. There may be vulnerabilities that you need to address. If there's any critical vulnerabilities, those need to be kind of part of the normal operating procedure to address those in each quarter.
Right.
But you can see, for each team, what objectives they're committing to. You can see how, if one of the goals is integrating products to promote cross-sell, you can see what each team is committing to for that quarter in order to achieve those things.
Right.
And then at the end of the quarter, you can see the objective completion percentage. So you can see the efficacy of each team, how well they're doing against the objectives that they're committing to. Nice. So for me, it promoted perfect clarity, and it also created that transparency thing that we were talking about earlier with the business side, where there's what we did was at a business value meeting, so we could.
That's show them. That sounds like exactly the kind of meeting I would love to go to.
So and we'd say, for this team, here's the 10 objectives that we want to commit to.
Yeah.
Is anything missing in your view? Or is this tackling everything you think we should be tackling?
Right.
And that gives them an opportunity to also ask, well, why are you working on the security thing and not
XYZ, whatever.
XYZ, or why are you working on this tech debt thing, this refactoring work, when we should be working on XYZ? So it promotes discussion and transparency. And so that there's really clear idea, what I always like to say to the business leadership is, and to my leadership team in technology is, we need to be good stewards of the investment. All the investment this organization is putting in to these products and to the growth of the company is going through technology. Now, of course, they're spending plenty on marketing. That's also incredibly important.
Yeah.
But really,
can I ask you a question about that?
Sure.
How, in your sort of experience, what's the best way to sort of calculate on an ongoing basis, perhaps, the ROI that's coming out of the R&D investment? So obviously there's all these product and product analytics stuff's happening, but if you just look at engineering as like a singular unit, how do you calculate ROI for that number? Because it's usually R&D is like number 2 right after sales, and in a lot of companies as far as budget is concerned, and so it's a big spend. How do you calculate ROI?
So I think as part of the SAFe process and determining, again, we talked about on a quarterly basis, you're determining the objectives that each team is going to focus on. Those objectives go in what we call an ROI calibrator. So all of the things that, the product team would gather from stakeholders, from business leadership, from market research, all the big things that they felt were most important would go into the ROI calculator, and you would determine based on the level of effort, number of resources that would be required to complete that goal or that objective.
So like a mini business case kind of thing.
Yeah, a mini business case that we would have a list of all the objectives that we wanted to tackle.
Yeah.
The ROI calibrator would determine its value, and we would stack rank according to that. Plus, like I said, I always thought of things in four main categories. What are we doing for retention? What are we doing for growth? what are we doing for non-functional requirements? And that would be like technical debt,
sure,
and security types of things.
Mm-hmm.
And then what are we doing for quality of life for, implementation and post-sales work. So I'd like to also categorize all the work that we're doing in that framework and in those categories, so that the business team would see, oh, wow, you're spending 70% of your effort this quarter on non-functional requirements. What's the deal? And again, that just promotes the right conversation, so that we can start to get an understanding of what our issues are and what our impediments to our success.
There's so many frameworks out there, like Run, Grow, Transform, this one you just talked about. Are you a big proponent of frameworks for VPs of engineering who are running big organizations? Or how much do you, because I know so many VPs who are really just run everything instinctually, and they make fantastic decisions and their businesses are thriving. And what do you say to somebody to convince them that, hey, you should be using a framework? Should you even be trying to convince people to use a framework?
Well, I do think framework's important. I think depending on the complexity, right? Like, if you're a startup organization and you've got 2 developers, you're not going to spend a lot of time on framework. You're going to spend a lot of time on getting things done. And really, you're going to hope that your vision, or wherever you're getting your vision from, is correct. Because I've also been in situations in startups where the vision was not correct and you spend a lot of time on stuff that nobody wants.
Right.
So again, that's going from a really, really lack of sophistication to an organization that does have framework, that does have people, process, and technology maturity programs. And, another kind of way of thinking about it, the way I think about maturity in general is, there's 4 or 5 levels of maturity, from the lowest level of maturity to the highest level of maturity. It's really hard to go from 0 to 5.
Right.
It's a process that needs to go step by step in order to, because, otherwise the organization isn't going to learn the right things and do it the right way.
Yes.
And there's also this danger of, claiming victory before you really have done all the things correctly to mature the organization.
Yeah, it's like taking a bunch of steroids to win the Olympics. Did you really win the Olympics? Yeah. I mean, maybe not. What about like this thing you just said is an awesome thing, which is that the organization has to learn. It's so interesting to me that we treat individuals obviously as entities that have to learn, but we don't really apply that as much as we should to the organization as a whole. We don't talk as much, I think, as CTOs about like, if you have an organization with 150 engineers, what did they know how to do well? And what did they not know how to do well? Because they have strengths and weaknesses in an organization and stuff.
Very much.
And we don't really measure all that stuff. This stuff you're talking about maturity level 1 through 5, like that's where we need to spend, I think, more time fleshing those types of frameworks out.
That's part of that people component that's really important. I mentioned job architecture.
Right.
Part of that to me is developing skills matrices for each job and for each team, so that, like, we were doing a lot of offshoring in my last position. So if we're going to take an architect and some really key members of the team and move those roles offshore, how do you know when the transition is complete without some sort of an assessment of where the skill sets are? If you're replacing someone that's at 100%, that knows all the skills, that knows all the products, that knows customers, with someone elsewhere that knows nothing.
Right.
How much time is it going to take? And at what point does the baton get passed? So I think, like, most
people just wing it, right? I mean, most leaders, I feel, they don't ever answer these questions you're talking about. Yeah.
And I think, like, if you're in front of a board, and you know this as well as anyone, and a lot of times it's going to be, let's cut, especially in the private equity world, it's, we want to hit the EBITDA number and without losing any capacity. Well, you're always going to lose capacity, at least for a short term.
Mm-hmm.
Always. I mean, I would never agree to that statement, right? Like, let's transition a bunch of resources and cut expenses without losing any capacity or any velocity.
Right.
And that's why I think it's critical for the VPs and CTOs to have a long history of velocity numbers, a long history of team efficacy and skills matrix numbers, so that look, if we replace these two people, we're going to lose
this
complete understanding of this module.
Absolutely. Yep. As an example, you can lose knowledge and understanding. You can lose velocity. You can lose so many things, quality, all that stuff. Yeah. Exactly.
And I think I think the mistake that some younger or maybe inexperienced leaders make is they get upset about that sort of thing.
Like, why can't we have it all? Yeah.
Yeah. Like they get super upset about losing.
Yep.
But it's better to have the data and then to have a transparent discussion that based on our history and the numbers that we've been seeing. This is what we can expect to see after we offshore X amount. Mm-hmm. And then that way they know, the business knows what to expect, the board knows what to expect, and everybody's going into it with 100%. Eyes wide open.
Matt, what about this thing? You kind of were talking. We were talking about SAFe, and we were talking about ROI and things like that. What do you do in a situation where, like, let's say you have a scenario, you're the CTO again of like 150 developers, you've got like a bunch of 10 plus teams, right? 15 teams. And you have a product team. Maybe they have 20 person on the product team. And they want you to do something, but they can't prove that it's going to work out. They just want you to sort of take their word for it that we need to do this major project. And they want you to trust their instinct because they know the domain. They are experts about the customer. But you as a CTO, you still have to sell this whole project to your team. It's going to take 3 teams, 4 teams, 25% of the whole org. It's going to have to do this, but there's no business case for it. And we're just trusting the chief product officer. Hey, he wants to do this whole thing. All right, I guess we're going to do it. What do you do in a situation like that? Do you just go with it or do you do something else?
I haven't been, to be honest, in a lot of situations like that. I think maybe on a small scale. Yeah. Some of the teams have been in situations, but I have not seen a situation in which, the head of product is going out and doing something that the business doesn't have a really good understanding for.
Yeah.
Or that they don't
but you know what the product leaders do sometimes tend to do? They'll come back with a lot of anecdotes instead of building a business case. I think that's what I'm getting at. Like, even in large organizations and stuff, they'll have 1,000 anecdotes about what the customer said and why they are saying it and stuff. And it's a lot of like their own perception and instinct on that. And then they want to take the investment in engineering and point it towards that direction, but they may not have a business case. I'm not saying everybody does this. I'm just saying, what do you do in that situation?
Yeah, I think I would ask for a business case. I mean, I would just say, look, I really need to see, the business case for this, why it's important as opposed to some of these other things that, we're already on the roadmap or that, we feel like we need to address from a technology standpoint. I think I would advocate for that. And then, if we're both reporting to a CEO, I think it would be, and we're at loggerheads and can't resolve that. I think that would be a perfect opportunity for a CEO to
step in.
And say, look, let's,
exactly.
I agree with product. I don't think we really need to spend more time on this. I've gotten all the, the win-loss data that we've seen and all this other stuff is pointing in this direction. And I don't want to spend a whole lot of time on it. So I would force the issue.
I've had to make quite a few business cases in my life because product was gung-ho on doing something, but didn't necessarily have the data. And I just gave them the business case kind of halfway filled out and said, all right, well, why don't you try to come up with some evidence for some other pieces of this? And then we just work together. And I just feel like, some earlier, less experienced kind of early stage product leader, sometimes you have to jump in as a CTO and be like, let's do this business case together. Like, I believe you, but let's make this more palatable to the rest of the business.
And I think that would be a good approach for someone that maybe you don't have rapport yet with and is a little green, little bit green. But I think, like I said, I've always made it a priority and highly important to get on the same page with the product leader, with whoever my counterpart is on the product side, and make sure that if we do have disagreements, it's behind closed doors, and otherwise it turns into this political thing that can just be
no question about that. Matt, one thing I think people would be interested to learn is, like, as you rose through the ranks, we both started off as developers, but as you went through and had higher and higher managerial positions, what were some of the learnings as you rose higher in your career that you could tell our audience that would help to make them more successful as they jump from director to VP to CTO? Like, what were some things that you didn't even realize were a thing that you had to, like a skill or something that you had to master? Like, can you give some examples of that?
Yeah. So I think one of the important things to me, and I think what has made me effective throughout my tenure, in past positions, has really been, I don't want to be an armchair critic. I don't want to kind of sit in my cozy chair, put my feet up, and comment on what's happening. I think it's really important to get involved, even if you're as part of a big organization, and to have enough data to know where and when to step in.
Yeah.
And I think the VPs that I've seen fail miserably are the ones that try and stay at that strategic level at all times.
Okay.
With their feet up, kind of surveying and thinking, but not knowing when, or not willing to sit, jump in, roll up their sleeves and solve a problem.
Right.
And to me, I think you can never really let go of that. I think either you have to have the leadership team where you can say, hey, I'm seeing a problem here. Mm-hmm. What are you doing about it? Kind of a conversation. And if you don't have that kind of leader in place to fill in until you can, find someone to fill that gap.
Right.
But yeah. I think just trying to stay above the fray and strategic at all times is a huge mistake.
Yeah, that doesn't work, especially I feel like it's certainly for smaller organizations, but especially even for organizations that are large and complex. That complexity, you kind of, as a CTO, you kind of have to master it if you're going to make your organization run well and stuff. If you don't know, like, the friction points, for example, between departments and stuff, you're not probably being a good leader and getting to a better and better place. There's also, go ahead.
I was just going to say, and when I first started working for you, post-acquisition, actually, it's my first time working for private equity. So I really didn't know what to expect. I think initially I was a general manager, and I had to hit I think a $1.2 million synergy number. And so that, like, I didn't really understand the context of that and what was going on.
It was a crazy time too. Don't forget, because of the speed we were going.
The speed was crazy, right?
Yeah.
But I reached out to my cousin, who was the CEO of a private equity-backed company, and he gave me some advice that I think really is good for anyone coming into this kind of environment. And the first thing is kind of funny, but like you may be at, out to dinner or at a bar and having a couple of drinks and having a great time with your private equity partners. They're not your friends. Your job is to create value for them and their investors, period. Mm-hmm. You're always going to be in some sort of evaluation process, like, is this guy providing value or is he not providing value? Mm-hmm. So you always have to think in terms of what value you're bringing to the organization, to them, and to their investors. The second thing that I was told, which I think is also true, is whoever your finance partner is, find them and make them your best friend, because you need to know the numbers as well as anyone, or better than anyone. So if someone wants to know what your budget is, or how many employees you have, or what, any of the data, how much the P&Ls are making, and which ones are growing and which ones are not. Like you need to know the numbers. Yeah. Be immersed in and good understanding of the budget and the finance side as well as anyone else.
Absolutely.
And to me, that was the best advice that I could have gotten.
Perfect piece of advice from your cousin, man. I can't even overstate it. What's interesting about VPs of engineering and product, I've noticed from being in private equity, is that they don't understand either of those 2 points until it's too late. Like they take like a year to understand it. And then by that point, they've lost a lot of credibility, and getting it back is tough. You have to like do some amazing things to get it back. But the people who do understand it, the whole idea of like, hey, I've got to create value every month, every quarter, every year, I've got to create tangible value. Those people succeed really well. And engineers, more than product people, I think have difficulty with that. I was talking to a friend of mine who wanted to do he wanted to migrate from one cloud vendor to another. And he could not articulate what that would do for the business. Right. Like it wasn't going to increase uptime. It wasn't going to improve security. There was a whole host. Finally, after like going through layers and layers of business value discussions, we finally came to the thing that it was going to do. It was going to help retain his cloud ops team and also help him hire more, because he lived in a place where they were surrounded by AWS people. And that was the real underlying actual business reason he was doing it. And it took ages for him to figure that out. But I think that's the thing. It's like that transformation from being an engineering thinker to being a business engineering combo thinker. That is a big lift for some people.
Yeah. And I think that's the thing, the most important skill to me to learn. Like we're talking about business value meetings, and we're talking about ROI on objectives that each of the teams need to do. And the foundation of that is understanding the numbers and understanding the impact that investment is going to have on the business. And if you can't talk in terms of anything that you're doing in technology and translate that to the business team and those kinds of, in terms of ROI and value that it's bringing to the organization, you're going to lose on a lot of opportunity.
Yep, absolutely. Now, Matt, what was the biggest surprise when you became CTO for the first time? And then I'll share one of mine.
I mean, I knew this beforehand, with, head of engineering, it's the same sort of thing. But I think it definitely took on a whole new level with CTO, which is you're really never off the clock. Especially, in my former role, I was, I had overseas teams. So I had to get up at 3:00 in the morning to
do the stand up and
to see a presentation, or if there's a team I was worried about, I wanted to sync up and connect with them. I would get up at 5 a.m. and see that, some sort of a major outage just took down all the airlines. And I want to know, are we using this technology somewhere in our stack? I think that, it's a full-time, more than a full-time job. And that brings me to my thought process around it, which is, I really think of it as a vocation. It's more than a job. It's something that I derive fun and value and,
right.
Enjoyment out of. Like that's what a vocation is. It's a calling. It's something that's bringing you to a particular job for reasons other than making money or other than, having the prestige of a title. And I think thinking of this like a vocation and treating it that way makes it easier to give up some of your personal time in order to do a job like that.
Yeah. Yeah. That is treating it like a vocation. That is such a good way to think about it, because there's barely any CTOs where it's not a full-time, around the clock, I should say, kind of endeavor. There's the rare CTO that gets to put up his or her legs and just relax.
I'm sure there are jobs like
there's
that.
Some out there.
I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I've rarely seen it. I think for me, one of the biggest learnings was. This is back in the day now. The first time I became a CTO was how fast you have to operate, especially when you're reporting. If you're a CTO who kind of just part of an ELT report to a board, the expectations are high, and you think you have all this time to, we're going to research this engineering thing for the next couple quarters. No way. You have barely any time, and you're expected to deliver so much value constantly. It's never ending. And that teaches you a lot, how to set your whole professional life up basically in a way that's constant value delivery, and you can do it and stuff, but it takes, so of course it's not a 9-to-5 job. What was something when you first became CTO, what was something that you felt was a skill that you already had that you really made use of, that really helped you be a successful CTO?
I think, and maybe this is something that I've been told a lot, and but let me just use this as an example. When I first moved to Northampton, this was my
That's
job
where I met you,
my job in residence.
Right.
I joined a basketball league at the YMCA. And again, I need I'm this kind of person that needs physical activity away from my laptop.
Yeah.
To kind of clear my head, whatever. So this was a lunchtime activity.
Awesome. Yeah.
Within 2 days of going, I was organizing their email list. I was thinking about operationally how to make this thing better.
You're back in front of the laptop.
So and people are, and I'm, for one reason or another, I've been told that I'm kind of a natural leader, and people are, willing to follow my lead. And for better or for worse, I really don't want to be the person leading a basketball league, but I end up just kind of doing stuff
it.
like
Yeah,
that.
Sure.
And I think that more than anything, I always felt like I could walk in a room of strangers. If it was a new engineering team, we just did an acquisition a year or two ago in Colorado, and the business leader was like, just, can you go out and get them oriented and take them out to dinner and welcome them to the company? And it's something that came naturally to me. And it's something that, maybe that was one of what you said in the beginning, you felt like I could connect with teams and I could get them to do tough things sometimes. Yeah. And I would even say, when I first met people, I would say, I understand that we don't know each other, but we might need to have really tough conversations sooner than our relationship is ready for it. I just want us both to acknowledge that could happen, and that we just give each other a break. If I say the wrong thing, if you say the wrong thing, it's okay. Yeah. We'll get over it, but it's more important that we're able to talk about what we need to talk about, even if it's tough. And so I felt like I could do that pretty easily. all the way, prior, and that's certainly
you're good at that, Matt. Absolutely, connecting with people, getting people aligned, making them focus on the right things. You're always very good at that. Let's transition to one super important subject for all CTOs, which is AI and the advent of AI. Now, when we used to work together, I remember you being really into mobile at that time. And I remember one day you made a presentation to me and a bunch of other ELT members, and you were like, we need to do this mobile thing. And I remember loving that presentation. I still probably have it somewhere, but
send it to me if you can find it.
Yeah, it was one of your Colombian teams, I think, was working on it. But first of all, at a macro level, when you see everything that's happening in AI, that's happened in the last couple of years in AI, is this as big as mobile? Is this bigger than mobile? Is this bigger than the internet? Like, where's your sort of head at with, like, how big can AI be? There's a lot of debate about that.
I mean, I think it's a pot of gold for, sitting there for a lot of organizations. Same as analytics in a way, except maybe on, not to overuse a term, but maybe on steroids. And I think, the first thing that I worry about for some organizations, especially those organizations, maybe they have a CRM or like the foundation of their business is kind of a source of truth for this whole market of customers. I think the first thing that they need to do is form a really good, reasonable data retention policy. And there's all sorts of pressure from SecOps these days to don't hold on to any data, right? Get rid of, as soon as you don't need data anymore, get it out of your servers, purge it.
Yep.
You don't need the risk
of
that stuff lying around. But if you delete and get rid of the wrong things, you're kind of cutting yourself off at the knees for the future. I think about, all my work that I've done in K-12, right? There's data points that a student information system has that could be unbelievably, just think about grades. Who cares about grades? Let's just get rid of grades. It's kind of, maybe it's a personal information, but that helps you potentially correlate academic results to something else. So if you can correlate maybe a financial aid award percentage to academic results, then you can tell the school, look, for this type of student and this kind of demographic, with these attributes, this is the right financial aid award to give based on all the academic results and financial aid awards that we've had in the past. That's just maybe a silly example, but that's one of the things that maybe you can't do now.
Yeah.
But
so AI's impact on analytics is huge.
Yeah. Huge.
What about its impact on the ability to write and test code? Do you think it's as big as what people are saying?
I do. I haven't seen the data on it, and I think we were just starting to experiment with it. I think it has a huge opportunity, but again, I think if you're not measuring utilization and you're not measuring velocity, it would be really hard to tell what sort of impact it would have on the team. But there's all sorts of, when you think about AI throughout an organization, there's just so many touch points potentially. And
not just every department.
Yeah, not even just customer-facing products, but every single department will be impactful.
Yeah. Was there any particular areas of AI that interest you? One, analytics. Are there any other aspects of it?
I think dev efficiency was, is a big deal.
Yeah.
I'm really interested in seeing its impact on that.
Yeah.
And so that was probably top of mind for me.
Do you think agents become a big thing next year? AI agents?
I'm not sure. I don't know a lot about that.
Yeah. Well, it's been in the news a lot the last maybe 6 months. And you hear a lot about these big cloud providers, which are going to, I think, basically morph into big AI providers.
Mm-hmm.
And these providers like Azure, AWS, GCP, Oracle even, that's just like one example, but they're trying to offer agents that do different kinds of work. And they're sort of, in my world, like in my sort of definition of agents, is like a discrete entity based on AI that can get a specific job done, you know? And they're like, they're trying, I think these big companies, like cloud companies, are trying to offer like a new business model for technology through these AI agents. And I mean, there's a ton of startups doing AI agents, you know, and it's funny because like growing up, me and you're probably similarly aged, like we saw all these attempts at agents. I mean, in my view, like Siri, you know, or Google Home or whatever is an attempt at an agent. Okay, you got something sitting on your desk that tells you the time and maybe tell your Amazon orders or something like that.
Summarize your emails.
You summarize your emails now, right?
Yeah.
Stuff like that. But they have to become really good, I think, for people to pay a lot for them.
Yeah.
You know, that's my view.
I mean, I use it for everything, to be honest. Like
yeah. What's your preferred? Yeah, sort of.
Right now, Chat GPT.
Yeah,
I use that a lot.
Well, that's even going beyond an agent, right? That's just like the straight up LLM right there.
Yeah, I mean, I use it all the time for weird things, even like you can upload a recipe and ask how to make the best way to make it more sour.
Yeah,
I mean, it's so interesting, the kinds of things that you can do with it, and I use it every single day for something.
Yeah, I saw a note by it was either CEO or CTO saying he uses LLMs 100 times a day. He said it's like that's how often. I certainly in part of my workflow too. Matt, before we wrap up, what is your view of organizations going into the next 3 to 5 years as AI becomes more prevalent? Does the organizational structure of a typical engineering team change dramatically? You know, what I'm thinking of is things like back in the day, you remember when there were webmasters, right? Like, and then that role completely disappeared. Do you think the roles will actually change in engineering teams because of AI?
I think it's already happening. You know, I think there's much more focus on data.
Yeah.
Like there are roles in data and data management that weren't there before. I think that's incredibly important right now.
Yep.
I also you know, from my standpoint, again, I'm coming from more of a larger organization standpoint, PE backed, where there wasn't a lot of patience for experimentation. And, you know, all the ways that we started to leverage AI were the ways that were already being offered, like, you know, leveraging Einstein and
right.
You know, from Salesforce. And like you were just mentioning, each of the big cloud providers are going to have really significant AI offerings that you can leverage to bring value, to use those models to bring value to customers or insights to customers about what the data means to them or how they can do their job better, or the things that they should be thinking about.
Right.
But I really look at it like any other objective that the engineering team needs to achieve, which is, does it have ROI or not? Do we need this just to keep up with the Joneses, or is there real growth associated with it? And I do think that that's the case. Again, going back to where I started with it, which is the data needs to be analyzed to you know, it needs to be retained first of all, so that you have the opportunity.
Got to have the right data. Yep.
But then a lot of things that CTOs might not realize, maybe in smaller organizations, is you can go to AWS, you can go to Microsoft, you can go to Salesforce, and they have ideation teams, and they have teams that will give you credits. You know, just for pursuing AI initiatives. Absolutely. And ideate with them. They've they've already worked with similar organizations as you have. I can guarantee, and it's an area that they want to grow, and they're willing to give credits and benefits to organizations and free ideation sessions. Mm-hmm. And I would say take advantage of that.
Use that. Yeah, big time. Big time. Okay, that's great. Matt, I think we're at the end of our time. It was really a pleasure talking with you today.
Nice to see you again. Nice to talk to you as well.
Absolutely. I always learn so much from listening to you, and I'm sure our listeners will have taken away a lot from this discussion. Thank you to everyone in the audience, and I'll see you next time on the Technocratic podcast. In the meantime, keep the sharks swimming.